Today I'm going to speak about Guy Debord and his theory of the society of the spectacle. At the end of the video, I'll briefly also address the question posed by a viewer, how that theory is different from my own theory of profilicity. Debord was a writer, an artist, an activist, a Marxist, a cultural theorist. He was an intellectual all-rounder, a public intellectual star in the 1960s and 70s. The Society of the Spectacle was published in 1967, and it's a modern classic of media theory. Although it's actually broader than media theory and some sort of quite comprehensive social theory. There's also a film titled The Society of the Spectacle. It's from 1974 that was made by Debord. The film follows the book in large parts and shows various kinds of images from movies and photographs. Actually, I found it quite difficult to watch. I don't think it aged well, not as good as McLuhan's The Medium is the Massage. This video will have 5 parts. First, I will address the question briefly, what is the Society of the Spectacle? Then I will discuss 3 theoretical components of the theory: semiotics, political economy, and ontology. Then I'll talk about the loss of authenticity, then about Debord's call for revolution, and finally, as said, briefly about the difference between the spectacle and profilicity. So first, what is the Society of the Spectacle? It's a book that presents a general social theory which critiques 20th century society as a hyper-capitalist society, where production and commerce of material goods has evolved into the production, the commerce, the commodification, the consumption of images. Now, images are the most important commodity around which the whole economy and all of social life revolves. The concept spectacle comes from the Latin verb spicere, to look at. So it means showing something, presenting something that is to be looked at. In a very literal sense, a spectacle is a show business. It's an economic or socio-political framework which is based on showing, on staging, on making something seen. And not just in the sense of a cultural industry as described by Adorno and Horkheimer, in the sense of the mass media, but broader. For instance, with the emergence of brands, all goods have a certain show element to them that is more important than the mere commodity itself. What is marketed is primarily the image of the thing. Think, for instance, of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, too, is a spectacle. Now, here are some core quotes. The whole life presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. And the spectacle is capital accumulated to the point where it becomes image. These are 2 general claims. First, all life is presentation of images that are produced to be seen. Life is a show. And second, this show is for profit. It's a business. Debord writes that the spectacle is a social relationship between people that is mediated by images. So the spectacle, as a notion of life as show business, is a socio-political and not an aesthetic, or not even in a strict sense a media theory concept. Spectacle defines society as a whole, and not just mass media. However, mass media are the prime manifestation of the spectacle. Debord says that mass media are the most stultifying, superficial manifestation of the spectacle. And he calls news or propaganda, advertising and entertainment the specific manifestations of the spectacle as well. The whole theory consists of 3 main theoretical components, or rests on 3 theoretical pillars. A, it is a semiotics. It's a theory of images or representations. B, it's a political economy. It's a theory of a mode of production of social life and of power. And C, it's an ontology. It's a theory of what is real and what is not. Semiotically, Debord's theory is remotely influenced by Walter Benjamin. Benjamin already spoke about the loss of the aura of art in the realm of technological reproduction, where there are only copies, like movies or photographs, but no originals. More directly, Debord is influenced by French post-structuralist thinkers of the 1960s like Roland Barthes and Jacques Derrida. These thinkers talk about signs and signifiers that construct meaning not so much as representation of something real or of real objects, but in relation or in specific difference to other signs. In order to understand the meaning of signs or images or language, you have to understand the discourse, the game within which they construct sense, and not the things they may somehow refer to. Here are some core quotes again. The epigraph of chapter 1 is taken from the 19th century philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach and his book The Essence of Christianity. Here Feuerbach speaks of the present age which prefers the sign to the thing signified, the copy to the original, representation to reality. So this quote is about decoupling the sign from the thing signified. And that's also indicated in the title of the first chapter, Separation Perfected. The spectacle perfects the separation between the sign and the thing signified. In this way, representations, signs, images, become independent from any original. Debord says, wherever representation takes on an independent existence, the spectacle reestablishes its rule. Now, importantly, the images are now superior. They're more important, more powerful, more valuable than what they represent. Think again of a brand where the image Coca-Cola is more powerful than the drink itself. So Debord says the perceptible world is replaced by a set of images that are superior to that world, yet at the same time impose themselves as eminently perceptible. You perceive the brand as much as you perceive the drink, or more than that. The theory of the spectacle is also the theory of a political economy. Debord is a Marxist, and for him the economy is the base structure of society. So the theory of the spectacle is also about political power and about a mode of production on which this power rests. The mode of production in the society of the spectacle has shifted from merely producing real goods, whatever, coal, clothes, drinks, to producing images. We now have a culture industry in the mass media. We have branding. We have events like sports or entertainment. And these are the real products. All life is now such a show business. If you buy a car, if you have a house, or if you travel, it becomes a form of show business. You not just move around or live or eat, but you move, live, or eat as part of a larger show business. A good example is tourism. Traveling as tourism is somehow staging your life as a show. Tourist destinations are marketed in this way. Tourism is human movement as show business, as spectacle. Again, some quotes. The spectacle has its roots in the economy, and it must in the end come to dominate the spectacular market. Or the spectacle expresses the total practice of one particular economic and social formation. It is that formation's agenda. In show business, the show is business. The spectacle is first and foremost an economic mode of production based on show. It dominates now the market. Economic value is spectacular value. This very much echoes Walter Benjamin's notion of exhibition value. Even though Debord wrote in the 1960s, the theory also has some hints at what Niklas Luhmann later calls social autopoiesis. Debord says the spectacle is simply the economic realm developing for itself, and the spectacle is self-generated, and it makes up its own rules. It is hierarchical power evolving on its own. Described in this way, the spectacle is self-reproducing and self-perpetuating. It's a system that constructs itself and that is not steered or governed by law, politics, or by individuals. It generates its own hierarchical power differences between the rich and the poor between the capitalists and the consumers. In the spectacle, Debord says, the commodity contemplates itself in a world of its own making. That's autopoiesis. Importantly, the spectacle produces extreme consumerism and commodification. Everything is turned into a commodity that is shown. As mentioned, movement becomes tourism. Sexuality becomes porn. Clothing becomes a fashion show. Information becomes infotainment. The spectacle is the world of the commodity ruling over all lived experience. Its show business consists of all that there is to see. The world we see is the world of the commodity. Following Marx, Debord calls this kind of extreme consumerism a type of alienation. Alienation is a classic notion going back to Hegel and Marx. And Marx thought by not collectively owning the means of production and the products that they produced, workers were, as a class, alienated. They didn't own what they made and the means by which they made it. Now, Debord thinks that by turning all our life into a show, the society of the spectacle alienates us as well from our direct life experience. He says the spectacle's function in society is the concrete manufacture of alienation. When life is a show, it's an image that is marketed and consumed. Tourism alienates people from their movement. Porn alienates them from their sexuality. The spectacle alienates human beings and human life. And then the theory of the spectacle is also about ontology, specifically about the traditional Western ontological distinction between what is real and what only appears to be real, but actually isn't. This was a distinction at the heart of the philosophy of Socrates and Plato. This distinction re-emerged in modern philosophy as the epistemological distinction between that which is true and that which only appears to be true, but may actually be false. And that was a question that, for instance, Descartes was very much interested in. For Debord, the spectacle is not fully real or true, but only appears to be real or true. Ontologically speaking, the spectacle is an appearance machine, a social structure that produces appearance rather than pure reality. It characterizes a society that is busy with the production of appearances. Here again some quotes. All it, the spectacle, says is, everything that appears is good. Whatever is good will appear. Or, the spectacle consists in a generalized shift from having to appearing. Now, instead of truth and reality, appearance reigns and is most valuable. It creates a world of illusions. Debord relates this critique of appearances to Marx's critique of religion as opium for the people. That is, as creating addictive illusions and a false consciousness. Debord says, by creating a world that is apparent, the spectacle has now taken on a similar function as religion traditionally had. He writes, the spectacle is the material reconstruction of the religious illusion. As a secular or post-religious religion or cult, it makes the false appear as real. The spectacle becomes paradoxically a real illusion. That which is really real has been replaced by a paradoxical reality that is unreal. Of course, show business is somehow a real activity. People really show and see and consume. But all you can see and consume are basically unreal staged images. So the spectacle is itself a product of real activity, but transforms reality into illusion. It is the very heart of society's real unreality. And as Debord says, it's the sector of illusion and false consciousness. The mass media, let's say the Disney Corporation or Fox News or CNN, are very real businesses whose business, similar to that of the Catholic Church in previous times, is to produce illusions, to produce spectacles, to create a world of appearances. Now, the loss of authenticity. Debord's three theoretical pillars, semiotics, political economy, and ontology, contribute to one grand narrative, to one single thread. The society of the spectacle varies one central kind of pseudo-historical complaint. Authenticity has been lost. Here are some core quotes that show Debord's authenticity nostalgia. They are both right from the beginning of the book. All that once was directly lived has become mere representation. And the former unity of life is lost forever. Here are two examples from the book about how the authenticity of direct life is no longer accessible in the society of the spectacle. One example is free time, off work, holiday, leisure. Debord says, even in such special moments like time off, vacation, the only thing being generated is the spectacle, albeit at a higher than usual level of intensity. And what has been passed off as authentic life turns out to be merely a life more authentically spectacular. Again, think of tourism, of going to an event, or going to a club, or going shopping in your free time. It's all somehow taking part in various forms of show business and or self-branding. It's not really authentic life, but life more authentically spectacular. A second example is stardom, celebrities. Debord writes, the individual who in the service of the spectacle is placed in stardom's spotlight is in fact the opposite of an individual and is clearly the enemy of the individual in himself as of the individual. Similarly to Benjamin's analysis, the individual that is most successful in branding themselves or in show business becomes a celebrity and thereby destroys their own authenticity. They become mere copies, images without reality. Think, for instance, of influencers today. Debord describes this process of an inauthentic existence in 3 steps. First, he says, the spectacle erases the dividing line between true and false, repressing all directly lived truth beneath the real presence of the falsehood. So the spectacular world, the mass media, social media today, is a world of mere appearances. It's a world in which that which is real, images or brands, is in fact not real or false. Therefore, all directly lived truth, authenticity, is systematically repressed. This then, according to Debord, leads to the following. The individual is thus driven into a form of madness, in which, by resorting to magical devices, he entertains the illusion that he is reacting to his fate. When living in the spectacle, you may think of, for instance, video games or fantasy games. We live in a world of fantastic illusions and somehow share a common madness that is comparable to the fantasy world of medieval religion. And thirdly, Debord says the recognition and consumption of commodities are at the core of this pseudo-response to a communication to which no response is possible. When we interact in the spectacle, again you may think of video games or fantasy games, then from the perspective of the society of the spectacle, this is actually just a form of collective consumption and not of authentic dialogue. It's pseudo-communication or fake communication with no real authentic interaction. It's a speech without response, as Baudrillard will later put it. Or you can say we're alone together in the world of the spectacle To quote the title of Sherry Turkle's book from 2011 about social media and digital life. Fourth, a call for revolution. Debord is not just descriptive, but as a French Marxist of the 1960s, he's also revolutionary. In his preface written 1992, he writes, "This book was written with a deliberate intention of doing harm to spectacular society." Actually, Debord advocated a new kind of proletarian revolution. The following quote gives you a taste of parts of the book which are written in the not very proletarian but fashionable and somewhat spectacular jargon of the time. I quote, "The proletarian revolution is that critique of human geography whereby individuals and communities must construct places and events commensurate with the appropriation, no longer just of their labor, but of their total history. By virtue of the resulting mobile space of play, and by virtue of freely chosen variations in the rules of the game, the independence of places will be rediscovered without any new exclusive tie to the soil." I break off here because, well, that's a little bit too much of jargon for my taste. Anyways, this passage ends with an outlook to the restoration of authenticity. Debord says, "The authentic journey will be restored to us, along with authentic life, understood as a journey containing its whole meaning within itself." Although in French, Debord uses the word réalité here, which then becomes authentic in the English translation. He still clearly expresses the idea that the whole point of his proletarian revolution is to somehow restore the lost authenticity of the past. Which brings us finally to the question, what is the difference between the spectacle and profilicity? Well, first, let me highlight a similarity, namely the semiotic pillar of Debord's theory. Like the spectacle, profiles are constructed images with the purpose of being seen by validation through a general peer in social feedback mechanisms. And similar to Debord's notion of the spectacle, the meaning and value, including economic value of profiles, emerges in social discourse in relation to other profiles, rather than as a representation of something ultimately real. So, the basic semiotic framework, in connection with Benjamin, Derrida, Barthes, Baudrillard, of spectacle and profilicity is indeed similar. However, the ontology and history is very different. I do not share Debord's authenticity master narrative and the basic premises formulated at the beginning of the book. All that once was directly lived has become mere representation, and the former unity of life is lost forever. I don't think that life has ever been directly lived. I don't think there ever was a unity of life. Somewhat similar to Marx, who thinks that life has always been struggle, I think that at least historical existence has always been incongruent and dissonant. So, from the perspective of profilicity, authenticity is not an ideal. It's not a lost historical state that needs to be restored. Importantly, profilicity is an identity technology. It's not primarily a socio-economic concept. Profilicity, like sincerity and authenticity, has its benefits, but of course it can also be hugely problematic. And therefore, yes, we also need to be critical of profilicity. Very similar to how Debord was critical of the consumerism and madness of the spectacle. But we shouldn't idealize at the same time a past that never existed. And importantly, to be effective critics of profilicity, or the spectacle, we need to be self-critical. I think Debord didn't really understand how spectacular he himself was. His writing style, his film, even his posture of a proletarian revolution was also staged, was also part of an intellectual show business. In short, Profilicity is not inauthentic, but post-authentic. And that's okay. We can only critique society from the inside, not from the outside. We are part of the spectacle, or Profilicity.